Welcome to the Political Trenches, local government at work. This week, we're spotlighting an important upcoming event for municipalities across Atlantic Canada, the Atlantic Mayors Congress, taking place from June 19th to June 21st in St. John, New Brunswick. To give us an inside look at what's going on the agenda, Ian chatted with Craig Pollett of the Atlantic Mayors Congress about the significance of this year's gathering and the key issues that mayors and wardens across the region are coming together to address.
Well, welcome, Craig. It's good to have you in a kind of a different perspective this time. You and I are often talking about strategic steps, but this time we're talking about the Atlantic Mayors Congress. So, welcome and happy to talk to you about this one.
Thanks very much. Yeah, happy to be on the other side of the screen, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. So, what got the idea of the Atlantic Mayors Congress started in the first place? Because it seems to be something that, if not unique, then is certainly quite rare across the country.
Yeah, it is. I know there are sort of regional municipal groupings meetings that happen across the country. Not a lot of them, but I know there's a few. The Atlantic mayors in particular, well, one, it's for mayors. Now, lots of other municipal folks have shown up, but typically it's for the mayors or in Nova Scotia, the wardens. And it was started in about 2001. The mayor of Halifax at the time, there were some big issues happening around the region. A few of the mayors decided they needed to get together and have a public voice on it. And they did. And it was a small group back then. I think fewer than 10 municipalities came together. And they found over the course of time, they started meeting once a year, twice a year. And they just started realizing that there was some value in an Atlantic voice, an Atlantic municipal voice on issues, which hadn't existed before that. And it's gone on since then. I mean, I can get into sort of how it's evolved if you want, but it was, yeah, 24 years ago that the first one happened.
Wow. And you mentioned that it was mayors typically who have been part of this and wardens, well, the chief elected officials anyway. Is there any restriction on the size of the municipality or geographical location of somebody who can participate in this?
No, not at all. When it first started, there was. I think the limit back then was probably 50,000. It was meant to be the larger urban municipalities. That quickly started to get pushed to the wayside because I think they realized the kinds of issues they were talking about were sort of shared with everybody. Because the large urban centers, like in any province, the large urban centers do have some very specific things about them. Their level of sort of structural sophistication, just the scale, the magnitude of the issues they're dealing with can be fairly unique to themselves. But I think they realized fairly quickly that the issues they were talking about and the things they needed to address were common to a lot more than just the big, 10 or so municipalities. So over the years, that whole population limit thing has fallen away. We've got municipalities who come to the Mayor's Congress as small as 2,000 people and take lots of lessons back from it and come all the time.
Yeah. Is there much transition, municipalities, people moving in or moving out, in terms of the membership or people who attend at least?
It's been fairly consistent for a lot of years. I mean, I mentioned it started in 2001. I think it's safe to say that for the first 15 years or so, once it got to scale, because it came up to about 20 regular participating municipalities, and it sort of stayed there for a long time. And that core group has not really changed.
Mhm.
In the last couple of years, just before I took over as executive director, and then since, there's been a bit of a bump. It's gotten more of a name, and its purpose has become more widely known, and we can get into that.
Yeah.
So we're at a larger number now. So for the upcoming meeting in St. John, we're probably talking about 40 municipalities having representatives there.
Mhm.
Um, that core group has been consistent. What's interesting is that mayors have changed, but the municipalities still send their mayor or a deputy mayor, whoever's available. So the individuals have changed, but the municipalities maintain their sort of seat at the table, so to speak.
This is coming up kind of on the heels of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities conference, which was a couple of weeks ago, at the time we're actually airing this episode. Are the topics that are covered at AMC different than what we would typically see at an FCM?
Sometimes they are, sometimes they're the same. I think what sets the Mayor's Congress apart from FCM is that it's the only real core Atlantic perspective on a lot of these issues. So there are issues I can think back to 2 years ago. We had a big session on the Chignecto Pass, the part of the peninsula that joins Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. Serious flooding and environmental concerns there. That came up for a big discussion. That's a core Atlantic issue that these mayors wanted to talk about. At the same time, last year in Summerside, when we had one of our biggest congresses, housing was the biggest issue on the agenda. So there was an Atlantic flavor or an Atlantic perspective on housing, but FCM has had a huge presence in housing. So there's a bit of a mix. There are issues that will be familiar to people who go to FCM. Maybe the take on them is going to be slightly different, but then there's also going to be things that come up that are really sort of unique to this particular area.
Sure. What's on the agenda for this week, this year's session or this season's session?
So we've got some themes and topics, and we always try to make sure that the themes are referenced in multiple sessions across the agenda. So this year, the themes are around economic development and collaboration, either together as separate themes. We have a session on immigration, where we're going to be talking about sort of the connection to immigration, the connection to economic development, but also the challenges of settlement. And it's a really, this is one of those things where the federal government's announcements last year around immigration and support for immigration were really felt differently in this region than maybe other parts of the country. So there's a very specific conversation happening here around immigration and the importance of immigration to the future of our region and to the future of our communities, not just to economic development, just to the nature of some of our smaller communities. We're going to be looking at fleet electrification and net zero efforts across a couple sessions. We actually have a session on the Canada Games. We actually have the 2025 Canada Summer Games is happening in the St. John's, Newfoundland region, which includes Paradise and Conception Bay South and Mount Pearl. So they're going to come and talk about what they're about to do. But we also have folks from the St. John, New Brunswick bid coming to talk about their plans for 4 years from now, because they've got the Canada Games in St. John and Moncton in 2029. And it's all about how do you use that bid as an opportunity to build a legacy, and how can you use it to sort of build capacity in your municipality that you didn't have before. Right. We've got regional economic development agencies speaking. So the region around St. John, City of St. John, has a thing called Envision St. John. In St. John's, we're trying to be as tricky as we can with names on the agenda. We just want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to screw that up. But we have Advantage St. John's, which is the regional development agency for the St. John's metro region with Paradise and Conception Bay South. They're going to talk about the importance of collaboration on economic development. You're going to be here to talk about incivility. And we're having a session on Saturday morning with everybody. More of a workshop than a talk, but it's for the last 2 years, incivility keeps coming up as one of the things that these folks really want to talk about. We're going to have a session on Atlantic advocacy. So we've got the four of the key municipal associations in the region are going to be on a panel near the end of the agenda, actually, nicely placed, to talk about all the things we've just, they would have heard in the last day and a half, and how does that tie into their advocacy work that they're doing with provincial governments, working with FCM on the federal government. And we're going to have a session on U.S. trade and its impact on municipalities, which is an economic development thing, but I think we'll get into an interesting discussion around collaboration because there's a lot of work happening. St. John, New Brunswick, as you may or may not know, widely quoted as the municipality in Canada most impacted by trade uncertainty with the US. Something like 90% of their economy depends on directly on US trade. So it was an apt time and an apt location to have that discussion. So there's lots to talk about.
Right. Well, and as the host city with St. John, did Mayor Reardon get an opportunity then, or does the host city get an opportunity to highlight some of the things that are of interest to them in particular?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So there's a reception. She'll also be opening up the main working day on Friday. The fleet electrification session that we're talking about is a St. John, New Brunswick session. St. John Energy is a municipally owned utility. They're going to give a talk on net zero. So there's lots of opportunities for the host municipality and others to be engaged in this. And of course, the Canada Games session as
Yeah.
well.
Sure. So when these sort of things happen, we think about these senior officials getting together. There's often some desired result that comes out of it. Is there ever anything like a closing statement or a communique or something where we all agree on something that we're going to concentrate on between now and next time?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily a thing that we all agree we're going to work on. And one of the balancing acts that I'm quite keen because of my background to maintain is the difference between the Atlantic Mayors Congress as a venue for discussion and a mechanism to raise the profile of certain issues and their impact on municipalities, as opposed to uh, the Union of Municipalities of New Brunswick, which is an association, a membership association. They do advocacy. The AMC is not really an advocacy organization.
Right.
We can give profile to what the advocacy groups are doing, and we provide a way to sort of raise up in the media and in the public's mind some of these issues. But there's no doubt, the fact that immigration is on this agenda is not a fluke. It was discussed in Summerside. It's been discussed with the municipal associations, as has economic development. So there's definitely a thread or a link between events. Something will come up in St. John. Some point of
Mhm.
discussion will come up in St. John, and that'll become the seed of a discussion at the next event.
Where is the next one? And when is the next one?
We don't know. So it'll be sometime in the fall, but that's
Right.
one of the decisions that the board will make either in St. John or immediately following St. John. There is a sort of an agreed upon a handshake agreement around rotation. So the next one will, in all likelihood, be somewhere in Nova Scotia. We just don't know where yet, but we know it'll be sometime in the fall. The key right now is trying to determine when in the fall we won't be running up against municipal elections or other people's AGMs, etc.
Yeah. Are you familiar with this type of model anywhere else in the country? It seems to be unique to the Atlantic provinces from what I've seen.
Yeah, the way we do it, I think, is unique to this part of the world, and it's a really flexible thing. I mean, one of the things I've noticed about the Atlantic Mayors Congress over the years is when all the players decided, for example, we just talked about advocacy and how it's not really an advocacy organization, but it's flexible enough that when all the players agree that an advocacy position needs to be highlighted, the Mayor's Congress can do that.
Hmm.
We can put out a communique at the end of the event to say everybody agreed this is an important issue and it needs to be dealt with. We did that with the Chignecto situation, the Chignecto Peninsula. So we can do that, but we can also sort of morph back into a really good conference and just focus on that and what people are getting from the individual event.
Hmm.
I know in the prairies there are meetings of the provincial associations, but that's not really what this is. So that's the advocacy organizations, the membership organizations getting together and having a joint meeting. This is sort of apart from that. So I don't think anything like it exists elsewhere in Canada.
Hmm. Well, but kind of the last sort of question it would be, I mean, is there anything you see for the future, like, or what do you see for the future of this Congress? Do you see it becoming more active, staying about the same, any of those sort of things?
I think it's going to get more active. One of the things when the board asked me to take on this role, one of the key messages they had for me was because over the last 20 years, it has morphed from sort of a meeting, you know,
Mhm.
10 to 15 people get together for a meeting. It's a really good meeting. That sort of scaled up to maybe 20, 25 people get together for a really good meeting.
Mhm.
And I think the general consensus was we want more of a conference feel. It's not just a meeting. We want to hear from experts. We want panels. We want more discussion. So we've been moving in that direction. And we went really big in Summerside. We've scaled it back a little bit for St. John just to be a little bit more focused. So I think the future of the Mayor's Congress is two things. We're going to sort of find our stride in terms of what kind of an event will it be? Is it one big conference a year and one small conference a year? Or is it, where are we going to go with that? But also, what's our relationship with those advocacy organizations, the
Mhm.
municipalities, Newfoundland Labradors of the world, or Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities, Federation of PEI Municipalities, UMMB, I already mentioned. What's our relationship with them and how do we build on that? Because they've got that built-in advocacy capacity and mandate, and we've got, to be frank, the only Atlantic municipal meeting of the year. FCM has an Atlantic Regional Caucus. I think it's fair to say that when mayors or councillors from Atlantic Canada attend FCM, they'll go to the Atlantic Regional Caucus. It's a really important way for the Atlantic region to comment on FCM positions and FCM activities. It's not really a mechanism for Atlantic municipal folks to talk about Atlantic issues. That's what the Atlantic Mayors Congress, I think, can be. And it's the only place where they can do that. Every province has their own meetings. The Atlantic Mayors Congress is the only one that's for the entire region.
Good, thanks. Well, as we wrap this whole thing up, I do note that next week Canada is hosting the G7, and I'm sure that will be a nice warm up for the Atlantic Mayors Congress. So thank you for spending a little bit of time with us, Craig.
I will take some lessons from Alberta on how to host that. Absolutely.
Meanwhile, I caught up with St. John Mayor Donna Reardon to talk about what it means for Canada's oldest city to host this year's Congress and how St. John is preparing to welcome municipal leaders from across Atlantic Canada. Mayor, thank you so much for sitting down with me and talking about the upcoming Atlantic Mayors Congress that is happening in St. John, New Brunswick. As mayor of the community, as the mayor of the city, are you excited to have mayors from across the Atlantic region descend upon St. John to talk about issues that are prevalent to Atlantic mayors across the region?
I sure am. It's an exciting time. There's lots going on. There's lots happening around the globe, and there's lots happening in St. John as well in response to some of that. So it's an interesting time to have guests here for this, especially
Why,
mayors.
why was it important for St. John to host an event like this? We are, we talk about you already mentioned the world and everything that's going on in it, but St. John is on the cusp of that reality of what it's facing with the trade war between Canada and the United States. Why was it important for St. John to host an event like this?
It's important really to bring people together. Now, when we said yes, the world wasn't as wild as it is right now. So a lot has happened. So fortuitously, I think, it being in St. John is important because we were named by the National Chamber of Commerce as the most city at risk for tariffs. Our export is $81,000 per capita. And I mean, we're not big. We're only about 80,000 people, but behind us would be Calgary at about 70, I think, one or 72. And then even if you look at the rest of New Brunswick, Moncton and Fredericton are each around $2,000 and $4,000 per capita. So we are the economic engine of the province, and we have, the highest export based on population in the country. So all of a sudden we were thrown into the spotlight. So it's just been an interesting time, and it's a nice time to have the mayors visiting because we have some options available as well. In St. John, we have the port here, along with the industries that do ship out to the U.S. mainly.
So we talk about the impact in that report from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, where it did
Right.
indicate St. John and Calgary as the one and two that would be
Mm-hmm.
impacted. Now we are, I want to say, about 5.5 months since President Donald Trump has taken office. Have you seen impacts already within the community of St. John? And when I come in a few weeks' time, will I be able to see the impacts that the ongoing trade challenges that Canada is under sort of prevalent in your community, or are they still sort of simmering right now?
I'd say they're probably still simmering right now. So our three big ones would be Cook aquaculture, and we would have lumber, and we would have oil. And so those things have fluctuated over time depending on the mood of the day in the US. So, and that's also impacted the Canadian dollar as well. And so that impact on the Canadian dollar also changes a lot of things as well, because a dollar made in the US right now is probably worth close to $1.40 in Canada. So it's hard to gauge it. The issue is for us is the flux that it creates. And like, do you buy a house or not? Is your pension going to be still worth, the same or not? Like, so it creates those uncertain circumstances for everyone, because we don't know what's going to happen from one day to the next, from one year to the next. We don't know if this is going to be changed and go back to the way it was. We don't know if we're looking totally for new partners. So there's so many unknowns, and I find it makes it difficult for people to make those big decisions that historically would have been made based on other criteria.
Is it hard from a municipal standpoint as well? Because you're going through budgets, and budgets always are in flux, and what's going on nationally always impacts locally, and particularly local budgets. How hard was it this year to sort of forecast what the future of your community was like under the uncertain realities that we currently find ourselves in?
It's been difficult since COVID, really. And some of the projects that we wanted to do, we said, well, like we just did our waterfront at Tolimagahamik, this gathering space, but we ordered a lot of the infrastructure and knew that we would be holding on to it for 6 months or more because of timing, because the supply chain was getting out of sync after COVID and prices were going up. So we've seen that. And so we've tried to adjust to that. This just creates more uncertainty in that whole scheme of trying to develop, build, move forward. So it's trying times.
Are you optimistic about the future though? Because I hate to sound pessimistic, but I want to make sure people think that things are going to get better and it's not going to be a doom and gloom the entire 4 years that President Trump is in office. But it sounds like there's going to be some challenges, and we haven't even recovered fully from the COVID-19 challenge that we were under less than 5 years ago.
I am 100% optimistic. I personally feel like this has been a big wake up call for Canada. We've been in this relationship with our, I used the words American cousins before, down in the States for 80 years now, since the end of the last war. We're comfortable. A lot of our economies are interconnected. We saw that with, beer cans, the aluminum starts here, goes there, comes back, so like we're so integrated and interconnected, and it's been comfortable. And all of a sudden now we're being, I say, beat up by someone who we thought was our partner. And we don't know why we're being beat up. And, he has historically said, if you do better, it won't be as severe, but we don't know what we're doing wrong. And so we can't really fix it. I have said, I feel like I'm in an abusive relationship where, and so at the end of the day, you can't stay in an abusive relationship. It's hard to get out. It's difficult to get out. There's be some pain, but at the end of the day, you're far better off for getting out. And so I think this has been good because we haven't traded amongst our own country. We've got all of these restrictions across the country. We've never looked at our trade infrastructure, our rail structure across the country, our roads across the country, like our weight restrictions from one province to another, our driver restrictions from one province to another. We've never looked to standardize that across the country, even if our credentials from one province to another. We've never looked to standardize that, which is crazy. In one country, there should be some standardization to the way we move goods, to the way we allow people to move from province to province and do their work and et cetera. So I think it's a real huge opportunity for us.
So you talk about the trade barriers, and that's more of a provincial issue. What can the municipalities in Atlantic Canada and while at the Atlantic Mayors Congress in St. John do to start addressing some of these issues locally? Because you're a small fish in a very, very global pond, but all the great ideas from my perspective start locally. Those are the ones that actually matter. So, what are you doing as mayor of your council, as mayor of St. John, New Brunswick, doing? And what can mayors in Atlantic Canada do to punch above their weight to make sure that mayors are heard on the national stage when we talk about these global trade barriers, whether that be internally in Canada or around the world?
Well, I think mayors are very powerful because we advocate on the way up, we bind together. And with the Atlantic Mayors Congress, we all focus together and we do some resolutions and then we carry those forward. So that's a collective voice within the Maritimes. When I was at the Atlantic Mayors Congress in Amherst a couple of years ago, the Isthmus of Chignecto was on their radar. And now, so the nice thing about that was we all knew that. And when I was initially interviewed about the tariffs, et cetera, and I could talk about the trade corridors, I have one in St. John, Route 100, known locally as Sims Corner, but I could also talk about the Isthmus of Chignecto because I had been to that Atlantic Mayors Congress. And so, I was always putting my oar in the water for those two trade routes that I am familiar with. So I think there's some real gain of the Atlantic mayors being together and sort of trying to figure out what our priorities are and then binding together to say, this is the message we want to send to our premiers and we want our premiers to bring that up to the federal government. I think it's powerful.
What locally do you want delegates to take away from this year's convention? Because you're showcasing the best of the best, that is St. John, New Brunswick. What are you hoping that delegates take back to their own community? Because whenever I speak to municipal leaders, and I haven't spoken to you on our full show, and hopefully when I'm in St. John later on this month, we will be able to sit down for a full interview or a 15-minute interview. I often hear that municipalities are great at stealing other municipalities' better ideas and then bringing back to their community and making it for their own. What are you hoping that delegates take away from St. John to go back to their communities and say, St. John is doing it great this way, we can do it great as well?
Right. Well, there is that rip off and repeat, and that's good. Why reinvent the wheel?
Yes.
If it's working, let's run with it. So that's one thing. But, I guess I want the delegates to, when they come here, say, like they'll hear from the port. The port's partners are all east of here. And so like that's different than what we've been hearing about the doom and gloom, with our partner in the States. So we're looking at those relationships that the port already has and across the Atlantic. And, how do we strengthen those relationships? And then, as the other communities see those, like how can they jump on that train maybe as well? Does any of that work for them in St. John? Can it be translated somewhere else? So I think really the message here from us is that we have so many opportunities, but we need courage. We need courage. We need to look at what's happening here and say, let's not waste this crisis. Like, let's, shake this up. Let's see what we can do. Let's understand what our barriers are and let's see how we can break them down. But we need to work together. It's the only way. The pathway to success really is paved with partnerships. And so, I think that's our message across the country. It should be our message across the country. We all need to be partners across this country. All the premiers need to work together. And I know they all have that kumbaya usually with a brand new premier and all that other jazz. But at the end of the day, we need to be focused on, like, what is it we can do? What do we want to do? What do we want to partner with? What are our priorities as communities? How can we pass those along? How do they fit into this either, energy powerhouse sector across the country or this trade corridor across the country? I think those seem to be the two big things. So how do all the municipalities participate and contribute to that? I think that's really what the message that you'd want.
So that is a great message, but is the message the same and I'm not trying to pick on any community in New Brunswick right now, but I'm going to just pick it randomly too. Is the message the same coming from the mayor of St. John, New Brunswick, that is coming from the mayor of Woodstock, New Brunswick, or Tantramar, New Brunswick? Because you get that urban rural divide. And I was just at the most recent Federation of Canadian Municipalities convention in Ottawa just last week. And I heard
Right.
that urban rural divide where the urbans and the rurals, they have similar issues, but we're talking two different languages. When we do those partnerships and when we have the Atlantic Mayors Congress in St. John later on this month, do you get a sense that we're all going to be talking from the same page, no matter if your community is 500 or 20,000?
I hope so. I think part of pulling us together is your premier's job as well, to pull all those communities together to see like what are their priorities? What are their top couple of priorities? What are, our top couple of priorities? How do we link those priorities? What's the federal government's top few priorities? What's the province's top few priorities? Do they even have an itemized list of projects that need to be done, and that they would be shared the cost with the province and the federal government? So how do those projects impact the different areas? And so how do you bring together people based on the project? So like I said, I'm not sure if the province has an inventory of projects that needs to be done, that should be done. And I'm sure that list, if they have it, is probably changed with Prime Minister Carney based on what he sees for the future. So I think there needs to be, some leadership to align us all. But yes, you do hear that divide. But I think, I think we can all get behind where we need to go if we want to make things better right across the country and in each province, for sure.
So I am cautious of time, and I have one last personal question for you, if you don't mind. Now, I have been to St. John, New Brunswick once in my life, and that was because I mistakenly put in St. John, New Brunswick instead of St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador when I was trying to fly out to Newfoundland and Labrador. So I got to see your community via the airport and only the airport. And this will be my first
Oh,
time actually exploring St. John, New Brunswick. Delegates might be in that same boat. What should people do while they're in St. John to pass the afternoons away after the convention is said and done? Because I've got a day before and a day after the convention that I've got to fill in St. John. What should I do?
well, you will be right in the heart of the downtown area when you're staying here. And then across the street is our brand new plaza, and that's where Market Square is. And there's all kinds of little restaurants there. We have been working on over time what is called Harbor Passage, and it's a significant walk. You can walk that passage. The port is right there as well. We have a brand new build that's going up on the former Coast Guard site, so you could have a look at that as well. And then you could walk up the hill. We call it Uptown because originally all of the shipbuilding, et cetera, was done on the water, and St. John is hilly. So everything would have been up from where the work was. So it's called Uptown. You can head uptown and go up the street to King Square, take a look up there. We have the old Loyalist burial ground up there, which is beautiful. I mean, it dates back to the Loyalist era. So that's great, So there's there's all kinds of little shops and that along through the uptown area as well that you could drop in and out of, little pubs, et cetera. So I'm sure you'll have lots that you'll be able to do.